Hey guys, Paula here with Meditation Amsterdam. I'm recording this video after I was diagnosed with COVID and spent something like a week and a half in quarantine. So that was weird. My parents also had COVID last July and they were very sick. For me, I didn't have any symptoms whatsoever. The reason I got tested is because a friend of mine got diagnosed positive a day after hanging out with me. So yeah, it seems that I got off really lucky. I thought I'd make a little video that's completely unrelated to this, around a conversation that I had with a friend of mine, and which I often have with this friend of mine, and it usually goes in the same direction, and it just keeps, kind of bouncing back and forth around this idea of how much you need to work or have a formal spiritual discipline such as meditation or mind-body work or things of that kind, up until the point where you get the insights on what you could call the higher self or the heart of awareness, or finding the self with a capital S, so to speak, right? So how much work you need to do before that, and how much work you should be doing after that. All right, so let's get into it. Now, there's a few schools of thought about this topic, and they land in different categories. So you would have the J. Krishnamurtis of this world and the Alan Wattses of this world, and they come from the school of listen. There's nothing to do, right? Everything that you want to find, that higher self that you want to find, you already are, and so there's nothing really to be done other than for that realization to somehow dawn on you, which is kind of true, right? But then you would have, let's say, the Goenkas of this world, or you would have people like Yogananda or Swami Vivekananda, and they emphasize this idea that you need to do very hard spiritual work on a constant basis before you become realized and after you become realized, right? So those are two camps. And what I try to do in this video is I'll try to resolve that apparent contradiction. Now, all contradictions, to my mind, can only be apparent, right? Like because I start more and more subscribing to this idea of non-duality and that reality is a single thing. Contradictions come from holding different viewpoints on a topic. And those viewpoints are by their very nature limited, right? So one of the things that we discuss when we talk about non-duality, non-conceptualization, is this idea that the moment you put it into words, or the moment you have an idea about it, you have localized reality into a single, or rather seeing it from a single point of view, and that by definition makes it limited. So that single point of view might be correct from that viewpoint, but it can never be ultimately correct anymore, right? So it loses that ability to really portray what the case may really be about any topic, really, because ultimate reality cannot be thought of or spoken. It can simply be, right? It just is, so to speak. And this brings us back to one of these famous and celebrated phrases that you see in the Tao Te Ching, which is the opening phrase of the Tao Te Ching, which says that the Tao that can be put into words is not the eternal Tao, right? It begins by saying that, meaning the second you begin to conceptualize, the second you put things into ideas or into words, you have localized and made your viewpoint on reality linear and singular, and therefore you are capturing but a very narrow perspective, and then you're missing out on the fact that reality is a single whole, right? So let's start with this caveat as well, right? This idea that when you have differences of opinion or whatever, it could very well be that one opinion is just plainly wrong. It could be that you have two correct opinions that are just failing to find the bridge towards one another, right? So let's begin with the Krishnamurti or the Alan Watts type of approach that says, well, listen, why are you doing all this hard work? Don't you see that you already are everything that you need to be, right? And to that, I would say that is correct in principle, meaning that that the essence of your being is always present, and that knowing is always present, right? The knowing that you are is always there. However, it suffers from a kind of pollution, if you want to call it that, or a bit of a warping, in the sense that this ability to simply know, so the mind's raw ability to know, or knowingness, raw knowingness, is so pervasive and so open and so transparent that just like a crystal ball, it essentially absorbs whatever is being reflected in its environment, right? So when you are perceiving something, your awareness of that something is raw knowingness taking the color of the something that you're perceiving, so to speak. And so what tends to happen very quickly is that we begin to identify with the content of our perceptions, and we very quickly lose track of the fact that we are perceiving. And one step before that is the fact that we are, right? In order to perceive, you first need to be. So that then our perception starts to get, our ability to perceive is always colored with the perceptions that it captures with that same ability. So we lose track of the ability to perceive. And so what Krishnamurti and Watts are trying to say is, listen, you're jumping from one foot to the other, trying to do all these spiritual practices, looking forward to enlightenment, looking forward to spiritual attainment, and God forbid, spiritual abilities and all manner of things of that kind. And in that trap, you forget, rather, let's say that trap drives you further away from pure being and pure knowing, right? So all that looking forward, all that doing, any thinking, any looking forward to, takes you away from being and away from the here and now. And so it's a spiritual trap, right? And so they're saying, like, just wake up already, right? Like, don't go through all that song and dance. Just wake up, be in the now, know that you are, and be done with it. There's nothing else to it, right? Now, I agree with that, but only in retrospective. In other words, to me, that is a simplicity and a directness of thinking and of painting the situation that can only come once you've had the realization of the self, right? Like once you get it, you get it. And so there's like, what are you guys doing? All this spiritual practice and all this stuff and whatever. So there is something to be said about all the spiritual practice that primes your mind and body for those insights to dawn, right? So we're talking pre-realization right now. And some of those practices, meditation certainly helps, right? Because what it starts to do when you're in the initial phases of all this discovery of your own self or your inner self, is that it begins to create small gaps in your time, in your mind continuum. So your mind is, like we said, this knowing capacity that takes on the shape of your thoughts, of your visual perceptions, of your auditory perceptions, of your memories, and it creates an ongoing stream of experience that is like a movie, and it grabs onto it, right? And so you're on that roller coaster and all its ups and downs, And so what meditation does is it starts to create like little freeze frames and moments in which none of that is happening. And in those gaps of mind, that's where insights have sometimes, it's not a guarantee, but it's much more likely in those gaps of mind for insight to make its way into your mind, and to help you realize that when no thing is being perceived, that the perceiver is still there, or rather, well, that's step one. The perceiver is still there, and then the perceiver also vanishes, and then you realize that you are simply the process or the very ability to know, right? So being and knowing being two sides of that same coin. And so for most people, so some people are born just knowing the higher self, the knower, so to speak. Some are even born with just being the knowing, right? So people like Ramana Maharshi, for example, are very, very advanced non-dual sages, like Nisargadatta Maharaj, for example. I mean, he did do some work, admittedly, or so he claims. But they are very high in that spectrum of they identify only with the knowingness process, not with the person, not with their thoughts, not with their perceptions, right? They're very, very far removed from that. So they're born with that. Other people are born with enough quality of mind in terms of intelligence, stability, or just pure suffering in their lives, so that they have to retreat backwards to the observer, because the ups and downs, the roller coaster of the perceptions is you can't stand it, or you're just smart enough and you want to get rid of unpleasant feelings. In my case, I've had painful experiences in my life, as we all have. And I also, I had recurrent and sometimes still do have anxiety popping up. And I really dislike it, right? So like, what is an effective way to either contextualize this or get rid of it altogether, right? So I have enough fuel in the sense of my anxiety and things that I want that I can't get, or things of that kind, to say, well, is it really the thing that I want to get, or should I just step back and observe the wanting, right? So, all these are things that make you create distance. So either you're born with it, or you work very hard for it, or you work very hard, but you still never get it in this lifetime, right? Like that could still very well be the case. They say that that it is granted by grace, so to speak. I wouldn't know how to comment on that. But it does seem to be the case that there's many people who are, by their mental disposition and their situation in life, extremely unlikely to get any of this self-realization talk. And some of them who, even though they will embark in the work, the realization simply will not dawn, right? It just won't land, which is, of course, a rather painful situation. But and so it's supposed to be kind of a karmic thing, right? Like you are just not given the right birth, or your mind is just not meant to realize that in this lifetime. That is how it is explained from a Buddhist perspective, if you want to subscribe to that narrative. Now, then we come to the topic of, so is it hit and miss completely? Are you just at the mercy of your karma? And then once again, Vedanta and Buddhism will tell you, no, you can actually break through your karma. You can dismantle it if you take the full method of realization seriously, and you do the meditation, the austerities, the asana, the breath work. All these things start to prime your mind in a surefire way. But it is a very it's a life commitment of a method, right? That there's you have to be absolutely focused on it if you really want to transcend that karma, if you were not born with the right spiritual disposition, if you will. So it makes it very unlikely for people to go into that mode, especially in modern society. And now we get to the point where we say, like, well, so what if you do get it, right? Like, what if you suddenly awaken, which I think I can claim I've experienced, right? So I think I can claim that my higher self, or my sense of being knowing, has awoken, and that I am moving from that space much more, to the point where I can do this video and just speak without getting caught in the content, and just almost seeing my mind and body kind of do their thing, so to speak, while I am the knowing quality, or the knowing awareness in the background that is, untouched by any of it. I can't claim that applies to every domain of my life yet, and that takes us to my next point. So this is where we abandon Krishnamurti and Watts, because they say, like, just get it and then you got it, right? And I would say, yeah, unless you don't, in which case that leaves you nowhere. But say that you do get it. Say that now you have become self-realized. At that point, I subscribe to a couple of authors that I've read and listened to. One of them being Rupert Spira, which is I think speaks very clearly about non-duality, and he has a phrase that really captures what I think is the essence of the path, which is, you have a lot of practices and a lot of song and dance and ritualistic things or spiritual things, and you acquire this entire spiritual persona and all this kind of stuff and all this discipline, and that takes you to the point where you become self-realized. Now, that is what he calls the journey to God, right? So you've made the journey to God, and now suddenly, oh my God, you get it. I am that I am, right? Wow, and suddenly, like, the world is brighter, and then it has a different quality to it, and your clarity of mind and all these kind of things increase. But then he says, when the journey to God is finished, the journey in God begins. And that's the one that I want to talk about, and that's the one in which my friend and I often disagree, although I still really do believe that it's a disagreement on the surface. I don't think we fundamentally disagree. And so the disagreement is, once you get it, there's no need to do anything else, because you know that you are, and well, there you are, right? There's nothing else to it. And in fact, from that point onwards, any activity that you engage in, like once you've become self-realized, the Krishnamurti camp will say, well, now why would you continue to keep this spiritual persona? That only reinforces ego as opposed to reinforcing the higher self. Why would you engage in spiritual doings, if that removes you again from the here and now, because you are engaging in those spiritual doings and those spiritual activities in order to get something in the future, which takes you away from the now, right? So the ego and future expectation of future desires removes you from a full acceptance of the now. And that is absolutely true, as a matter of fact. There's no debate around that. Where there is debate, and that's where Rupert Spira and authors also like Xi Ming, and this is a book that I believe I've commented on before, The Higher Martial Arts and Mind Over Matter. He talks about the refinement of consciousness, right? And so what it means to my mind is that even though the higher self may have been realized, the depth and continuity of that realization needs to be reinforced across the years, and it's the work of a lifetime. Now, I think where the trap lies is in calling it work, or in calling it doing, or in placing indeed expectations on what that future may bring, because that by definition, all of those by definition take you out of the now. So I would almost want to rephrase that and call that a non-doing. So in other words, from the moment you become self-realized and your journey in God begins, so to speak, what you exercise is a constant going back to the now and the self whenever you find yourself in the periphery on whatever life circumstance may be occurring. So for example, as I speak now, I'm using this video as an exercise in not getting lost in what I'm saying and lost in the content of what's happening, and rather retaining the sense of self. Now that has happened sporadically throughout the video, right? So the glimpse, we talked about meditation creating these little gaps of no mind in the stream of thought. So those gaps for me are very big now. I can do that for minutes at a time without losing my sense of self, right? And that means that the self has pervaded this activity. It has kind of colonized it, if you will. But however, and here comes the thing, is life will throw at you 1,000 different circumstances, such as getting lost in thought or having a conflict circumstance with a colleague or with your partner, or a relative passing away, or any of these kind of things, and that will it'll very typically take you out of your sense of self. You'll be caught in the content immediately, and you will experience a pain and sorrow and or anger, for example. Now, it is one thing to say, yes, but when that happens, I can regain my sense of self and just observe. And it is another thing to say that your relationship to the content of life has become colonized by the self to such a degree that anger or sorrow arise and pass away a lot in shorter intervals and less intensity, which I have experienced, as a matter of fact, as this path continues. And that you may never be able to fully eliminate this, though some masters apparently have. So Ramana Maharshi was so removed from the world that no world circumstance could ever shake his solidity in the higher self, right? And we may never get to that point because he essentially just renounced life completely. He had to be fed, and he would have rats or bugs or whatever chewing on his feet. I mean. So Vedanta can have an extreme side to it where the body is kind of disdained, and I don't think that is particularly healthy either. So we don't need to subscribe to that. But my point in this is that you ought to beware about declaring victory so soon and stopping with formal practice, or formal practices that refine your consciousness on an ongoing basis so that your experience becomes deeper, sharper, more rewarding, and that your sense of self becomes also deeper and more stable across all the circumstances that are in your life. I was joking with the same friend of mine about, hey, if you really think that you are not your body, right? Like, I am the self, not the body. Like, if you're that good, one of the litmus tests behind this is take a cold shower every morning. And if you don't even hesitate and just switch it on, it means that you are truly, like, the sensations in your body are really not felt as me, right? But any hesitation or any chickening out of this, as simple a test as it is, already reveals to you that you are not as realized as you think you are, that your path in that realization has only begun. Now, the final thought behind this is that Krishnamurti and Watts are right, in the sense that once you become realized, all your spiritual work, if you want to call it that, or your spiritual activities, and this ongoing retaining of the sense of self, is a non-doing. It is a non-doing that needs to happen in the now, and it is not something that you should do looking forward to to a certain outcome, because that immediately just makes it not work, essentially. Then you've reverted back to ego and the trap of spiritual reward in the future, so to speak. So that it's a huge trap. For myself, it's a massive trap. But knowing it makes it part of the exercise. So you go, aha, here I am working for a future in which I have zero anxiety, and I can walk up to anybody and do this, or start a business and not be stressed. It's like, that's future thinking and future expectations, and that undermines the very activity that you're doing, or the very non-doing that you are putting into place. So any spiritual discipline, once you are realized, must be a non-doing that is focused on the here and now, and full embodying and awareness and acceptance of the here and now, and gratefulness for the here and now. And anything other than that, it's simply going to take you away from the self, which you've already realized. right? And it's a funny thing, right? Because to say that a practice is an undoing is just crazy, but the habit of mind of latching on to doings and to goals is a very strong habit. So we need to have a practice in which we systematically undo that habit, and that's what I would call the work. And that's how I reconcile those two views on this idea of, do you need to work spiritually or just let it happen? What if you're already realized? What work is there left to be done? To me, the work left to be done is a non-doing or an undoing of the ongoing patterns of mind. And it is a colonization of all activities, sensations, and perceptions by the self, so that the self is always present behind anything that's happening. So I hope that that video is helpful, and I hope that you guys, do some spiritual non-doing at your end. Cheers.